you can start. Okay, Kyle?
Okay, sure. So, well, thank you for inviting me for this session. So I will be talking about my paper, which is my up to be my job market paper, and what I'm going to try to provide a quick overview about the idea of the paper, and to not spend much time, also in the technical part of the paper, so I can go straight to result. But the motivation is the following: the paper is wants to do is to study the risk premium in the U.S. Treasury bonds. Clearly, it's important. Treasury bonds play an important role in financial markets. We all know this. It's risk and dynamics. It's essential, right? For essential importance for economic issues. So, for instance, I can name three points here. So, it's important for monetary policy, right? It's strategic for for investors' portfolios, and also for understanding financial events like the zero rates that we experienced in 2008 and the one that are experienced now. So just to give put this in context here, the U.S. Treasury market, clearly we know this is the largest government debt we have in the world. As of 2019, it had 14 trillion of outstanding bonds. And if you compare to the whole bond market in U.S., it represents 30%. So 30% are the U.S. Treasury bonds, and all the other 70% is corporate debt, is made of corporate debt, mortgage municipal bonds, money market instruments, and asset-backed securities. So here, this paper here will provide, the goal of this paper here is to do a new interpretation and think in a new way of creating a factor to explain the bond risk premium. So what is this risk premium that I'm talking about? So here first, I show here in this three-dimensional plot here, the yield curve, the famous yield curve here. So in this axis here, I can see the years spanning from 1990s to the end of 2018. And in this axis here, I have the different maturity of bonds. So ranging from 1 month up to 30-year bonds. And here in the vertical axis, I have clearly the yield. So when I see seeing this yield curve, we see collapse the whole U.S. history in this yield curve here. We can see, for instance, 2008 when we had the crisis here, when the curve inverted, right? So that's when we say the curve it's health when it has a positive slope, in the sense that short maturity bonds have lower yields than higher maturity bonds, than longer maturity bonds. So it's always positive slope. And when it flips, it's considered a sign or of some sort of recession. The risk premium that I'm talking about here, we understand, right, that the long maturity bond should be equal to the expected average of short maturity. So for instance, a 10-year bond should be equal to, let's say, 1-year bond, expected 1-year bond 1 year from today, expected value of a 1-year bond 2 years from today, and so on. It should be the sum of this. When it's not, this is the risk that I'm talking. When it's not, so this is we call the bond risk premium. So what is the central question of this paper here that I'm trying to provide is, I want to answer a question that has been around for a while. And this bullet here is pretty much what I'm telling you is a question that Croquin posed in a comment of a paper that I will mention here, which is from Bauer too. What these literatures try to do is to find a linear combination. We want to know this linear combination of forecasting variables that capture common movement in the expected return across, in this case, bonds. So we want to know this. How do I can create this linear combination? Clearly, I think everyone here can imagine bond premium is a big question and has been around a long time, at least 30 years or more. Perhaps the most important paper here, or one of the started its seminal paper was from Bliss 1987. The problem is this question never been fully answered. Many factors, when you go to the subset of this literature here and talk about how you explain with factors this bond risk premium, so we can think about many factors were proposed in literature. So I will just perhaps cite here 4 of them here. Von Bliss clearly was the first one, and they use a forward spread. So use forward rate minus the spread of a short maturity bond. Croquin Piaget, perhaps today considered the most important factor. What they do, they did a linear combination of forward rates, and they create a factor out of that. We had Ludvigsen, we had Scala, Pioval, and so on. Ludvigsen, on the other hand, they use principal components loadings out of a big macroeconomic data set. The new papers here we have 2005 and 2018, we have more trending inflation and so on. My problem with this is I would like to take a different route. The paper here, the whole idea of the paper is to take this different route. The argument of the paper is that what we've been doing, financial economists, they are trying to manually discover and handpick the list of factors that should be there. And the problem is they may be living in some relationship between what we call state variables in their derivation. What I claim is that the search of deriving, building, and estimating factors that represent state variables in macrofinance is limited because it's pretty much what we're trying to find. So for instance, if I return here one slide, Corkini Piazet's most important paper today in this literature, they use a linear combination of forward rate, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, and 5 year, and the linear combination. Why 1 year? Why it's not 1 year and 1 year and a half, and so on. So we are doing is we are picking, we're selecting. At the end of the day, we're selecting. I want to avoid this. So I avoid this with what? Perhaps today, one of the most powerful approaches is machine learning. I'm using deep neural network to uncover the relationship in the full set of information. The goal of the paper is to provide a new route, a new interpretation, but not doing a pure specification search or pure data mining. So I always considering the theory behind this. So the whole derivation taking consideration the economic theory about this. So what I do, I will use what they call spanning hypothesis. I need to go to the yield curve to collect this information. And I do this, taking consideration this, all the economic theory behind of that. The empirical findings in 2 bullets here, I show that I will derive 2 factors, and I show that this parsimonious number of state variables that I'm deriving, what I would call a spanning factor and spanning factor, they have predictive power of for excess returns for bonds over 1 month holding period, which is a more robust finding. And this is an implication of one of the papers here too, saying that we are using not robust, when you're using 12-month holding period. So we have problem, econometric issues when you have returns. I will mention this quickly also here. And also provide intuitive interpretation of these factors that I would derive. So I link this with macroeconomic variables so I can see and link, oh, there is this spanning factor and I see the macroeconomic variable, what's going on. I can understand what this factor is impact, which this factor is an important factor to explain the bond risk premium. And I also linked with sentiment-based variables. So like, for instance, economic policy uncertainty and all the other sentiment-based variables that were created after economic policy uncertainty measure. So just a quick comment here about the results and what the contribution of the paper. What I'm doing is, the idea is that through the analysis of deep neural networks, I want to introduce nonlinearities. This is the goal. So why I'm taking this deeper route and why I want to use this powerful approach from machine learning is to introduce nonlinearities. I want to introduce nonlinearities in the stage, which is the first stage, when I am finding the hidden factors. This is important. But while I'm still, at the end of the day, after I do the first stage, I will answer the question here that I pose, what's the linear combination? And I will do this in the second stage. I will do a linear combination of the hidden factors that I find through a deep neural network. So I'm adding nonlinearities, what were not considered before. And I also, at the end of the second stage, I do the linear combination that Croquin wants us to find. What's this linear combination? And I also do this generating a parsimonious number of factors, 2 state variables, spanning, unspanning factors. Why? Well, clearly, with deep network, we can introduce flexible and complex nonlinear relationship from the inputs. And while we approximate quite well, this is the important why this algorithm is so good, because we can approximate arbitrarily well a rich set of smooth functions. And I can discuss more if I have more time. Nonlinearities has been, new literature has been showing that introduce nonlinearities in financial economics is extremely important. So here I have Gu et al. It was published in Review of Financial Studies. Bianchi also Review of Financial Studies, all saying that how important it is for us to introduce nonlinearities when we derive factors. And the second point here, it's important to say, is that I am also, this paper is in the intersection between bond premium and sequential learning. What I'm doing here, at each stage, right, at each point in time, each T, I will be re-estimate everything. The machine learning will be re-estimate all the parameters. So there is a sequential learning, a Bayesian view of the problem here. And there is also the literature shows how important is sequential learning in bond risk premium problem and also in general in financial economics. Again, I avoid handpicking the variables from the yield curve. I take in consideration the economic theory, and I will use information only from the term structure, the yield curve. And I do this while approximating function. Wow. I overcome the problems, econometric issues. So Bauer and Hamilton said how problematic are many of the factors proposed literature because they did not take into consideration overlapping returns, and he showed problems with that. So I avoid this, I overcome this problem. I'm showing results for 1 month holding periods, which is I avoid all this problem in private literature. We just keep this. And fourth, I also started process, as I mentioned, with only information on the term structure. This is important. Again, this is not a pure data mining process. It's a process that it's a paper that we are taking into consideration how the theory it's how I relate this completely with the economic theory behind the bond premium. So with that, I'm taking consideration what's important hypothesis in this literature, which is the Spaney hypothesis, the idea that you need to go to the yield curve to get the information. Okay, quick comment here about how it works, the process here, the deep learning structure for bond premium. Well, this literature said, let's put everything, there's a matrix Z that change at each T, time dependent. It should encompass all the risk in the economy. What we are doing here, and this is relating with the theory, the current theory, which is called a dynamic term structure model, is I will partitionate this matrix of all the risks. There will be ZY, which is information only from the yield curve. So I'm going to the term structure. And there will be something that is orthogonal to that, which is left out. And that's why we have a ZYC, which is complement. But the complement is orthogonal in this case. That is all information that should be useful for us to understand the bond risk premium, but cannot be found, we cannot find it in the term structure. So for instance, perhaps there are macroeconomic information that which is not being spent in the term structure. So that's why we have a complement there, or simply based variables, for instance, that could be important for that. So this is relating the whole idea. What we had, the whole idea, perhaps I would say, in this literature is to do some sort of predictive regression like this. So whatever you're going to consider as Z, and we can use some of the papers that I mentioned, be it a linear combination of for rates, whatever. So it's all this Z here. Rx is the excess returns. This is the notation used in this literature, Rx. N is for what bond, with maturity of bonds. So N years from today. I will be using monthly holding periods, so it will be always in the future, H over 12, so H is for months. Well, if you're using the Spaney hypothesis, your whole Z, all the risk, the economy, should be just ZY. Anything else, if you're not being consistent with the Spaney hypothesis, you have your ZY complement should be different than, should be not equal than empty. Artificial neural network, quickly here, just to mention here, the idea is, I think some of you might be quite familiar with it. It's a primer here, just a quick comment about it. And if I have time, I can discuss more. The idea is to replicate the brain structure in the sense that I want to add many levels of processing information. The idea here, this artificial neural network has been around for decades, I think since 1980s. The important point here that's being more useful today and more powerful today is because of computing power, we can make it deeper and improve the algorithms with that. This fits in a part of the machine learning we call supervised learning, because we're going to have we have a target to always compare what we are trying to derive. Here, a target, perhaps you can try to relate this with like econometrics, with the idea of a dependent variable. So here, my conditional target is my excess returns. Okay, so that's what I want to condition. And I have my inputs, clearly, my Z, all my risks for my economy. The point is, here I'll be using information only from the term structure. So what I'll be using just yields. So I will have a high dimensional set of yields for monthly holdings, so from 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 60 months, because I want to take in consideration the short part of the term structure, because with this way I can compare with the other factors in literature. So to summarize the idea of a quick, a simple deep neural network or artificial neural network, this is not deep enough. We have a layer of input. The end, we have the output. In this case here, it's just a single one node. And here it's layers and layers of hidden layers of these are the hidden layers. So each node here, we predetermine the function that we want to associate with it. I can't discuss more, but it's the idea that we're gonna feed And then each arrow here represents a set of weights. These are, you can think about as a hyperparameter, perhaps you can think about this, that need to be determined. But this is a process, it's a process of sequential learning that you need to always try to, in each iteration, you need to try to find what's the best arrow here. And this is what a different attribution network is trying to do. Clearly, if you look this here, if you do the process, I can walk you through the process if you have time, is we want to, you're adding a lot of nonlinearities here. It's clear. A simple deep network like this, or artificial neural network like this, you already can see a lot of nonlinearities being added here. So the structure is as the following. So I think I have 5 minutes and it's enough. So the idea is the following. I designed 4 separate artificial network, deeper neural network, one for each mature year. So one here is for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and 5 years. Again, why I'm looking for only for these years is just because I want to compare with the factors proposed in literature. They mainly use 2 through 5 years. I would like to go, can I go further? Yes, of course. But I want to derive my factors and I can compare with the factors in literature. So perhaps, so this is the reason that I'm looking to 2 to 5 years. So each one, the input layer here will be, we're gonna use just yields, so set of yields. So I'm being consistent with the economic theory here. Then there will be clearly the hidden layers. And then at each T, I'm going to be finding a scalar here associated with this maturity, a scalar associated with this maturity, and so on. And this is done clearly at each T, and it's a sequential learning. So you keep doing this, and also at each T, as new information arrives, you redo all the process. At the end of the day, you're going to have a vector of Fs. These are the hidden factors that will be used to do the linear combination. That's the idea. So this is the first stage, and this is the second stage of the process. And the second stage, this idea here, it's quite similar with the Heaven literature, okay? It's doing the linear combination here. So I'm doing a linear combination using the Fs from this, from the deeper network. They are separate groups of deeper networks. And this here is just trying to using, this is just a pure simple regression because I'm just trying to regress the average of Rx in my linear factors, in my hidden factors from the previous stage. And this, when I do this tau transpose F, which is the tau are the parameters here, and the Fs are from the previous stage, this is the spanning factor of that I derived. And I also do, and this there is more idea here that I will not have time to discuss, is I also, to relate with the new theory about this, I also find the orthogonal, everything that it's orthogonal, and this here will be my unspan. My species will be my unspan. I create a function out of that. I will not have much time to discuss that, but this is the idea. I have the spanning factor here, and everything that are orthogonal, it's gonna be my unspan factor. Just to have an idea, I use information from 62 to 17. The evaluation is from 1993 to the end of 17.
You have 2 more minutes.
Okay, perfect. That's perfect. So here, just to see clearly the excess returns ranging from 2, 3, 4, and 5 years. As you go longer, it's get more volatile. So here, this you can see in a three-dimensional plot, the Fs, which is the hidden factors from the first stage. So I have years here, I have the maturities ranging from 2 to 5 years, and here I have the DNA factors. The takeaway of this figure here is as you go longer, as in the beginning of the process, there's an erratic process, but then it's stabilized, and it's always a positive slope, as it is the yield curve. And it also flips during a recession. So in 2001 and 2008, we see it flipping the DNN factors. So what is my spanning factor is in black. What is my unspanning factor is in green here. And I'm comparing both with the factors from the literature. So I'm comparing with 2 most important today. Krokén-Piaget in red and Ludvigsen in blue. Krokén-Piaget use spanning factor, Ludvigsen does not use. The idea here, takeaway, it's not any of those. It's correlation and so on. I'm not finding something that has been already found in the literature. Quick regression here, 2 regressions here just to comment and to close. Here, predictive regression using spanning factor and spanning factor. Takeaway of this table, it's always statistically significant, and it's and we have a good adjusted R-square. And here, if I compare with the other factors in literature, so here I have Ludwigson-Ing, Fama-Bliss, and Croquin-Piazez, you see that it does the statistical significance does not drop in any case. In some cases, you're going to see Fama-Bliss disappearing. Some cases, if you go longer, you're going to see Ludwigson-Ing also being statistically not significant. Here, just compare. I don't have time now. I think I'm running out of time. I'm going to go for a conclusion. But here I tried to find how you can see this with macroeconomic variables. And you can see some groups of macroeconomic variables having high association, in this case, square correlation with my spanning factor, and here with my unspanning factor that close the gap, everything that's fit. And you see here with some variables as well. Just to conclude, what I did in this paper here, I proposed a new way to collapse all the information from the yield curve, generate one single factor from this. This is the spanning factor. And this has a theory behind it. I use deeper network to uncover this relationship. And I show it has this parsimonious number of factors, state variables, has predictive power over 1 month. And I also provide an intuitive interpretation of these derived factors. So we're linked these with macroeconomic variables and sentiment-based variables. So that's what I have prepared.
Thank you very much, and closing in the right time. And
thank
so,
you.
We have no time left for discussion, but we can continue afterwards, or you can write to him and so on. But I like your paper because the hidden layers have a structural interpretation. I really truly like that. Thank you. Our next paper is by Aravinda Batista, and so you can get on.
I will stop sharing.
Can you share your document? So Aravinda, so should I remind you in 3 minutes, 5 minutes? Tell me. You're mute. You're muted.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, 5 minutes and 2 minutes, or even 2 minutes is fine.
2 minutes, okay. 20 minutes is really short. People know I didn't realize that.
I am getting a box that I'm not supposed to. Okay. So this paper is about, thank you. So this paper is about essentially getting a predictive factor out of disaggregated employment data. We use a state-based, this is odd. Anyways, are you getting a square in front of my screen?
We see, but
I can see that too. Yeah.
You can't click it away, huh?
Right, I couldn't. Now it's
done now.
Okay.
Move this window away from the shared application.
I don't know what this means. I've never seen this before.
Yeah.
Perhaps if you try to again.
Can I just stop share and reshare?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Good.
So we basically the purpose of this paper is to estimate a dynamic single factor out of state level employment growth data. Usually you think of employment, aggregate employment especially, as a coincident indicator of US growth or a lagged indicator of US growth. And that's true, that is what we find. But state level, if you carefully go through the selection, gives a fair amount of predictive component, especially true for short run. And we get a fair amount of gain. So after getting the dynamic factor, then we evaluated using for both GDP and GDI data out of sample 1 quarter ahead performance. We compare it with sectoral employment data. So basically why state, why not sectors? We will compare that as we go along. So what's new? Our growth follows the estimation of our true growth that we target this predictive factor to. We treat that as unobserved and simultaneously estimated with the predictive factor. The selection of states is very important for our results. So we follow a likelihood-based approach to select for the selection of states, essentially SIC. Another part that is helpful in following this up is that each state does have a non-predictive component. We allow that to be persistent. It seems to help to isolate the predictive component. So what do we find? About 7 states are quite useful for getting this predictive factor. We follow an SIC-based selection. The factor performs quite well in sample and pseudo out of sample. And then the results for GDI growth are somewhat better than GDP growth. So this basically builds up on a sequence of papers by Nalevak, who argued in Brookings and I think JMCB paper that GDI growth rates are quite useful in basically intersection of starting of a recession, especially the 2008 recession. Then they together, Aruba et al., this is actually the key paper that I build on, Journal of Econometrics paper that argues that both GDP and GDI growth rates are essentially noisy indicators of what is going on in the economy. But if you using both data and allowing for the noises, if you estimate a common growth rate in both, that is far better indicator of what is the economic growth. This obviously builds up on the longstanding Stock-Watson dynamic factor approach of treating the economy as unobserved. That's the NBAR approach. And we use it, and I follow up on the GDP GDI growth rate from Aruba et al. Paper. The second strand of literature that I build on is the Aoyong, Piger-Paul paper and Guer and Leibelevan paper that argues, so basically I'm not the only one that says state employment does have predictive power. So these are basically probit models, univariate probit models that argues that state employment can be useful within the national recessions. Aoyong and Hernandez Murillo and Aoyong does have a paper on aggregate employment using the same features. That's not probit, but it's on employment. The third strand that I use is basically targeted predictive literature, especially the biennial paper in Journal of Econometrics using hard thresholding methods. There are further papers, but they all treat the target as observed, not as unobserved. So without much ado, this is my basic multivariate unobserved components model. G1 and G2 are growth rates, GDP and GDI. CT is the true growth rate that is to be estimated. ADNSS used that as an AR1 with mean. I expand on that. The employment growth rate are E1 to K. A key part is basically figuring out what that K is. And they all have a factor that enters the targeted unobserved growth rate with a lag. I assume that factor to be AR1. So dynamic, you can extend that. I did extend that. No difference in results. So in addition to that, all the employment growth rates are assumed to have a component that is persistent, but not part of that common component of GDP GDI growth rate. So this is a UC model. The correlations are obviously important. To be consistent with that targeted factor of employment growth story, we assume the UT, which is the factor shock, is uncorrelated with the noises in the GDP and GDI. Also, we assume the common growth rate shocks are uncorrelated contemporaneously with the non-predictive factor of employment growth rate. However, we do estimate contemporaneous correlation between common growth and the employment factor. So basically allowing for the contemporaneous effect and interchangeable effect in that as well. So these are the key correlation assumptions. So we have 50 states plus DC. It's a tall order to find out the optimal combination computing wise. So we do take an initial step following Bianing Hart thresholding method, where we use one state at a time to select on the base for that common component. So it's actually a little bit beyond Hart thresholding method that Bianing advocated. It is now geared towards the unobserved growth rate, but we do one state at a time and find 16 states using 1% likelihood. You can use T, same results. So using those 16 selected states, I go farther in going through all the combinations and compare the SIC of the bivariate GDP GDI growth rates. So it's comparable across all the employment data I'm putting in, because the bigger the multivariate model gets, the likelihoods are uncomparable because they are defined over different data sets. But the common thing is the GDP and GDI. So I compare according to that and select the minimum SIC. The data is standard Fred database and BLS law. Two-sided estimates I present. Standard errors of the predictive factor include parametric uncertainty. Out of sample starts in 1998. It's sort of the issues that come up. So selection outcomes from Bianing, but using the bivariate with observed growth is these states. The lowest SIC factor going through all the 16 state combinations came from these 7 states. We use smaller number as well, just to reduce the computing time. Again, very good performance. So parameter estimates. So BM is the benchmark. So that's the ADNSS model, exactly the ADNSS model. So the phi is the autocorrelation, the first order autoregressive component. You can see it's 0.52, higher than what you would get from a GDP growth rate, and that is exactly what they get. So this almost exactly replicates with expanded sample the ADNSS model. Basically, getting rid of the noise improves the predictiveness of the unobserved growth. So when we add our 7 selected states, what you should check is that phi goes down quite a bit. The lag enters with a fair bit of significance and quite high. And there is a significant reduction in sigma v, which is the shock standard deviation to the common growth rate. The SIC is obviously lower, fair bit of likelihood gain. Just for a comparison, and we do other stuff as well, I took the principal component of the first Hart thresholding 16 states and put that in to compare with our 7 states. We do see some gains SIC-wise and relative to BM, but it is not as good as the 7 states. So the gains are a little less. A note that the correlation is 0.43 between contemporaneous employment and common growth rate. So positive, and that's pretty much what we expect. So this is the bivariate common growth rate that I put in for comparison, and the growth and the employment factor in green. Quite significant, quite a bit of co-movement. It's fairly hard to see the predictiveness in this. But co-movement, you can see a fairly tight standard 95% confidence interval. So I standardized this next. Why? Because just to make it comparable and see whether we can visually see the predictive component. So this is the 1991 recession. And you can see the orange employment factor is actually preceding the turning point by about a quarter. 2001 recession, again, the orange factor, the employment factor is preceding the turning point by about a quarter. A non-recessionary period, 1977. So you can see some fair bit of turning point changes happening 1 quarter before. The blue line is above 0. Okay, so this is interesting to me. So 2011, 2012, this was not recession, but there was a lot of talk about double dip recessions. And you can see that the employment factor is preceding the turning points by about a quarter. So sort of giving you the in-sample details of the predictive comparability of the results. Out of sample, so individually, I check GDP growth and GDI growth out of sample results. If you take their own lag as benchmark, I see a 6%, 5% gain in GDP growth, 20% gain in GDI, so quite a bit. Okay, so next, okay, so maybe this is too relaxed. So I use use a different benchmark and use the common growth rate that I estimated, like ADNSS. First thing you should notice is GDP, both GDP and GDI, the MSE reduces quite a bit with common growth rate. So this is a higher benchmark to beat. And this is also, as far as I know, a first out of sample result of supporting the ADNSS framework of using the common growth as the benchmark for both, as far as I know. So it's an out of sample support for ADNSS. Okay, so obviously a higher benchmark, our GDP growth gains have gone away. However, the GDI growth stayed. So it's still about a 14% MSA reduction. How about comparing with Piger, Wall, and Oyoung? So they do have, so using that own growth rate, I do get a fair amount of gain, much better gain in recessions. However, for GDI growth, the gains are both in expansion and recessions. So not only we confirm, we got a little bit beyond that. How about comparing with sectoral data? So these are the 4 sectors. The first 2 columns are just plain same thing that I showed before. This is in sample. So industries, 4 industries taken following the same procedures. I get a fair bit of predictive power using industries, but not as good as 7 states. So it's a gain from the benchmark, but not as much as 7 states. Using the same out of sample sectoral employment, you can see GDP, GDI, 8%, 7% growth, 12%, 11% here. However, with common growth rate, both goes away. So overall, our results are strongly supportive of using that selection of state level employment growth as the predictive factor.
I really have 1 minute.
Thank you. So I have a bunch of robustness checks that I did with financial variables, other threshold principal components, big 4 states, including manufacturing, and definitely against 2 aggregate employment series. That what are we losing by including aggregate? The results stand stand a lot, but we don't lose a whole lot using 5 or 6 states. So overall summary, so what do we gain? It can deliver pretty good predictive information. GDI results are much better from 16 to 20%, even in expansions, 8 to 12%. We do have, to the best of my knowledge, out of sample support for Aruba and somewhat beyond Piger results, Oyoung Piger Wall results for GDI, including non-recessionary periods. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you very much.
You.
We can continue the discussion, right? Later.
Yes.
Very nice, interesting paper. Thank you. Let me try to share my paper. Can you all see the paper? Okay. So this paper is with the former student of mine, Cheng Yang. He is looking at all of us from China in the middle of the night. So Cheng, you're welcome to come in anytime, okay? All right, so let me move on. Time is very little. Yeah, you can see him now. The key word here, it's a big paper, so let me just get to the point. It deals with binary predictions, okay? So like a recession, non-recession. And the idea is that how do you evaluate these kinds of predictors, whose job is to predict a binary event? And there's a huge literature on this, of course. And the binary variables that we are honing into here are rare, uncommon binary events. Okay, typically in economics, if you think about it, all the binary variables like Arvinda was talking about recession and so on, they are relatively very uncommon. Okay, the last 50 years, the peak has occurred only 7 times. So it's like 1% of the total number of sample observations. So what happens, even though it is observed, that global scores like pseudo-Arbor square or say Brier score, which is MAC, okay, these can be very misleading indicator of how good truly the prediction is. And so that's what you're doing. We have a nice predictor called yield curve, which is long run minus short term interest rates, which works very well at particularly around 12-month horizon. Second is that that yield curve has a good predictor, and whenever it inverts, the financial market says a recession is coming. That's a very good predictor. In fact, one of the best predictor of the leading indicators right now, the composite indicators. So we use that as an example to show what you're trying to say. And our point is that these global measures very often could be very misleading regarding its true underlying predictive power. And we also use the receiving operating characteristics methodology, again, came from machine learning and so on, and also another called precision recall curve analysis. These days is used in machine learning quite a bit to actually quantify, characterize the underlying uncertainty of the prediction. Okay, and there are 2 basic issues. One is a hit rate, and is a false alarm rate. That's what the ROC graph does, and we try to quantify. There's one important paper here, I may tell you, by Rudy Bush and Williams, who said that look, this yield curve, everybody knows it's a great predictor. How come the survey of professional forecasters do not use this to predict 12 months ahead recession? They don't. Are they rational? Okay, so that's a paradox. They call it a paradox. So one of our point is that that paradox can partially be explained if you know the true underlying uncertainty of using that particular predictor. And that's what we are trying to do. Another issue here is that a lot of people have been talking about that the true predictive power of yield curve has been going down over years. So Stock and Watson in the 80s built their model, factor model, and they're hot on different types of spread, right, interest rate spreads. And then came the 1990 recession, and the model failed completely. And people said the reason was that they based their basic prediction model based on this yield curve, and that kind of failed in the 80s and beyond. Okay, so that's another thing we're going to look, that if you say it's losing its predictive power, in what sense it is losing the predictive power, or can you do something to calibrate and salvage some of the old predictive power? So these are the things we are doing, and let me run through some nitty-gritties. Okay, all right. Typically in the literature, people do probit regression, right? They'll do a binary regression, get the probabilities, and work with it. we are not working with probability. We are directly using the data, directly, no probability model, so no parametric assumption. So we are using directly the to do the ROC graph, because ROC is invariant to alternative predictors so far as their monotone transformation. So whether you work with the probability prediction or the directly, will not make no difference on the ROC graph. Okay, but the advantage is that in the street, people look at inversion of the yield curve, right? That means they are looking at the actual value. So that way we are being useful to the actual analysts who are not running models. And also we're running this on a daily data, because we believe in the street, people don't work a quarter or a month to anticipate recession. They're doing on a day-by-day basis. So we are monitoring on a day-to basis. Okay, so these are the nuances of this paper. And there's a lot of literature on this. I've just given a few, but there are hundreds of them, as you know. That's okay. We have a paper. If any one of you want, I'll be happy to send it to you also. So here, so idea is that you have a predictor, say yield curve, and when it goes less than zero, say delta is zero, we call it threshold, you say recession is coming. That's the way it is set it up. And we are using a 12-month ahead prediction. You can do anything, but 12, it works the best. That's why I use that 12-month ahead, because you're trying to make a point here. Now, this basic confusion matrix, the contingency table is very basic. So you predict yes or no, and actually it's a happened yes or no, and you can put these four sufficient statistics for this, and you define the hit rate to be pi11 over pi1 plus pi01, and the false alarm rate is very well known, right, as pi10 over pi10 plus pi00. And these are the two statistics people work in ROC graph. Now, what happens is that when you have a continuous predictor, say yield curve, or a probability forecast, you need a threshold to convert a continuous probability forecast into binary forecast, right? Say 0.5 or 0.4, 0.9, and so on. So now we know that there is no holiness with 0.5. It can be anything, depends on the relative cost of misclassification. Okay, so these are quite different depending on the context. A lot of this literature dealt with weather forecasting, medical imaging. You are trying to get the disease recognition, right? So there, the missed signals are very costly compared to economic recession. So it depends. And then what happens is that there another thing I'll touch upon in recession forecasting. There are two definitions people use interchangeably. People don't pay attention. One definition is you say a recession is going to happen if it happens at a fixed horizon, say 6 months from now, like Stock and Watson put 6 months. Okay, exact research. Another is a lot of people are doing started with Jonathan Wright's paper, where you say now a recession will happen during next 6 months, or during next 12 months. They're two different, right? And people use it interchangeably. So these two definitions, we also in this paper evaluated in ways. The second definition may be more relaxed definition, less stringent definition. Okay, and you can do that again using the same, machine, the techniques that you're using here. Okay, now what you're doing here, because a lot of people said that the predictive power could have gone down, we have defined these 7 recession episodes. Okay, beginning with 1980 recession, 80, 81, 90, 200, 2008, and then the last one. And because our horizon is 12 months ahead, our sample, the training sample, goes 12 months before the recession. So we go recession by recession. We look at the shape of the ROC graph and PRC graph. See what was going on, huh? And so these are the ROC graphs. So you can see that sample 1 is the first one, which is not good, right? Then as we go into the latest recession, looks like the ROC is getting better. A better ROC bows to the left, right, up. A best ROC graph is like this. And you can compute the area under each ROC graph also. That gives a global measure of how good this graph is. Okay. and so you can see that some are better than others. But whenever these graphs intersect, then you got a problem of comparing AUC, because for forecasting, the threshold matter. A lot of this segment may not be very immaterial. Okay, the hit rate of say 1%, 2% has no role, right? You want hit rate of at least 50, 60, 70%, right? False alarm rate of 80%, 90% has no role, right? So the whole ROC graph and computing area under the graph may not make sense under many circumstances, even particularly when these graphs intersect with each other, overlap. Okay, and in the econometric literature, ROC graph is quite popular now. People almost unexceptionally use AUC. Okay, that's the gold standard. And we're going to say, wait a minute, you can do better than this. It can mislead you. Okay, that's one point. Now, one thing in the weather forecasting, what they use is rather than AUC, they use something called Kuiper score, which is just a hit rate minus false alarm rate for each values of the threshold. Okay, and this Kuiper score in econometrics was popularized by Granger and Pacer and their two classic papers. Even though they call it Kuiper score, actually it is Pierce in 1884 had discovered this Kuiper score. So it should actually be called Pierce score, but people call it Kuiper score, at least in econometrics. All right, and these people have said that this measure does a better job in characterizing the predictive power in a skewed, unbalanced actual value, where you have 10%, 1% occurrence, okay, 90% non-occurrence. You cannot, you have to make sure that you don't put all your importance on the non-occurrences. You understand? That's a key here. And all your logic model, probability model suffer from this problem. Okay? And people somehow don't pay much attention to this thing. So this, people say that can work very well, without any mathematical proof. Another thing that people do is concordance, right? That concordance is nothing but percentage of correct predictions. So the sum of the diagonal elements in the confusion matrix, and Hardin and Pagan has used, is very well known now in econometric business cycle analysis, and a concordance is nothing but percentage of correct predictions. Okay, if 95% of your sample is non-occurrence expansion, right? So even if you don't identify any recession, you're still concordance in 95%, which is very good, right? So I'll show you this again, a global measure problem. Now there's an algebraic relation between the concordance and the Kuiper score. Kuiper score is H minus F, hit rate minus this thing, but it has this T0 over T1, which is a big number, which overwhelms this C measure. So this imbalanced nature of the sample unfairly affects the concordance index. That's the problem with this. Okay, these things are not very well recognized, I must tell you, even in the hands of the biggest econometricians. I've been talking with Adrian Pagan, he's a good friend of mine, and we are discussing these things. And of course, he commits to this concordance, right? He has in a lot of papers. Now, so this is what happens. A typical on our data set. Okay, if you vary the threshold, what you see is that the hit rate and the false alarm rate varies a lot, right? 15% to 94% hit rate goes other way around, but the concordance almost doesn't vary. It's not very sensitive. Okay, it's around that, right? But the Kuiper score varies a lot, goes from 14% to 66%. So you see, it is very reflective of what is going on in the hit rate and false alarm rate. But the concordance doesn't reflect that. Now this is our main table. So we have all these different samples, right? Recession 1980, 81, 82, the last recession, okay, cumulative data. And for each sample period, these are the threshold, which maximizes the Kuiper score. What you see is that over this sample period, the threshold value should be zero, right? Inversion of the yield curve means threshold zero. It's never zero. It was 0.2, close to zero, in the 1981, but after that it has been steadily increasing. Right now it is around 0.9. So don't wait for the yield curve to get zero. You should call recession much before that. That's what it tells you in order to maximize the creepers. And each time you see that your hit rate is around this value, in excess of 80, but the alarm rate is around 30%. This is what you are getting with the predictor in terms of the uncertainties for type 1, type 2 error. You can't avoid this, that's the point. And people should be aware of the risks you're taking of the false alarm rate. Okay? This is you're quantifying the uncertainty. On the other hand, if you stick to zero threshold, like inversion of the yield curve, what you see is that the Kuiper score doesn't vary much, right? The hit rate is around 50%, and the false alarm rate is very low, around 5%. If this is the type of risk tolerance you have in your predictor, that it would have a hit rate around 50%, okay, then you stay with it. But very often, I think this is not a very palatable mix of H and F. Okay, and hence zero threshold is you have to get out of that. So that's about ROC graph. Okay, and we did some bootstrapping on the threshold value. You may say that, well, aren't they statistically different from zero, right? So there's no standard formula to compute the standard. So we did a bootstrap. And what you find is, indeed, they don't cover zero. Say lately, last 4 or 5 recession, it's around 1, and it is never zero. Okay, so it is distinctly statistically different from zero, higher than zero. All right. Now, what is the precision recall curve? What it does, this is a more recent thing in machine learning. What they do is, see, this is a big number, right? Expansion, non-event for us, right? Most periods are expansion. So what they do is, rather than defining a false alarm rate, they define precision as pi11 over pi11 plus pi10. That is called precision. And so what they do is, they look at precision rate against the hit rate. So they're honing into recession periods only and ignoring the expansion period. It can be 90%. So they're not being this measure of a graph of precision against they call it recall. This is a hit rate actually. Okay, in machine learning, that is called PRC, precision curve. All right, and so that goes. If I give the graph, they look like this. So this precision recall curve actually should bow to the right upwards. Okay, best precision recall should look like this. And a flat line, like not a diagonal line, it is a baseline. It is a relative proportion of the event, which is in our case like 10, 11%. And you can see again that that the precision recall curve doesn't look as optimistic, as good as the ROC graph, which looked more bowed to the left, looked pretty good. This doesn't look that good. So if you, as a graphical device, if you use precision recall curve, it would tell you the true predictive value of your predictor. When your predictant or the explained variable is highly skewed. That is, it's a very uncommon event. For example, in medical imaging, people are testing for, say, tumor. A tumor possibly is positive 1 in 10,000. It's not 50-50, you understand? And makes all the difference. So this is more receptive of predictive power when you're talking about events which are not very common. So this is the thing. And now this is another thing. What happens is that if I fix, say, a particular hit rate, they're all bunched together, but you have to really look at for each of these graphs, what are the underlying precision, right? Now, if you look at here, so this is sample 1, sample 2, up to sample 7. This is the latest one. And what you see is that if I fix the heat rate, suppose, I look at the precision rate, right? The precision should get better. Better is better, right? I mean, if the precision gets more, right? Highly precise. What you see over sample for a given heat rate, the precision has been increasing. So rather than saying that the yield curve is losing predictive power, what you see is actually that in fact it is gaining. It's not losing its predictive power. For each heat rate, whatever heat rate is your risk tolerance, okay, you can choose. It depends on your utility function, 90%, 80%, 50%, whatever. And you can look at the corresponding precision rate, and you see that in each case, the precision, in fact, is increasing or unchanged. It's not going down. So that's a myth that the predictive power of the yield curve is going down. And you see this by looking at the, my time is over, right? It's now 6:05. I'll close it in. So the main important, there's a huge literature on precision recall, and a lot of people are saying this is a much better measure to do uncommon events. Huh? And what we found out is that in this literature, they also have a uniform measure, that is the precision rate and the heat rate. You can have a weighted average, like a Kuiper score, and their measures. In our case, you see if 2, which is defined like this way: P is the precision, R is the recall rate. That this F2 measure is identical to the Kuiper score. You get exactly the same result. So it depends on how much you value P and R, the relative value. You can be located yourself at a particular point on the PR curve. But important point is that here also you can measure the area under the curve. Okay, but again, there's a problem. The moment you get a global measure like this, it can mislead you. A better way of looking would be to look at, for each heat rate, look at the corresponding precision rates and see what is, then you decide what is good for you. What is your utility function? Okay, what is the relative cost function, and choose a particular point rather than getting a global measure of area under the curve and so on. Okay, so this is the two things, and we find some equivalence between the two, and so on. And this is the same thing as Kuiper score, it so happens. And these are the conclusions. So that is the thing. I think I basically gave you all the, punchlines. Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm done. Anybody had any question or anything on any of the papers, please go ahead. We can have 1 or 2 more minutes.
Dr. Larry, I have a couple of sort of follow-up questions.
Yeah, please.
Great presentation. I saw this about 2 days back in
the Econometric Society, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed it. So I have a couple of quick questions. So is it possible to identify by the false rates? Suppose your AOC, I'm sorry, yield curve is 0.9 or less. From those episodes, can you identify not formal recessions, but informal recessions, sort of giving you, so I was thinking of that 2011, 2012 episode, that even if you think that it's not a formal recession, but there was widespread belief that it's bad. So any elaboration on that?
Yeah, you see, this is the thing, that we are identifying certain underlying false alarm rate, right? And, right? What says that you have a predictor good. A lot of people run a probability regression and plot the graph, and they look perfect, right? Right? For each recession goes up and so on. You wonder, What's the problem? If you do so well, how come people don't anticipate recession at all, right? Most of the time, what is wrong? And so the point is that in the street, say when people are using the graph, do you think that 80% hit rate with a false alarm rate of 35%, if a predictor comes like that, a trader would take it as a predictor, right? I mean, that's a relevant question. Is it good enough for you to use it as a predictor, right? If the hit rate is 50%, would you take him seriously, the predictor, if a 50% hit rate? You understand? But the point is that given the predictor, this is what you will live with. And so, like sometimes there are near recession, right? Things were getting soft, employment was going down. Even the last recession, right? Before the COVID came, 4 or 5 months before, economy was slowing down.
Right, right. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yes, particularly household unemployment, right? And a lot of and NBR decided, yes, economy was slowing down because that's why they rated as February as a turning point, right? Not March, not April in America. They said it's February, right? It's very, very significant. So it was slowing down. And so slowing down doesn't mean the full-fledged recession, right? So it could be a close recession, but somehow it got saved, right? Even the last recession, without the COVID, maybe we would not be in a recession. Possible, right? Right? So these are, you have to do counterfactuals, right? But you can see these are all global measures, right? So, but yeah, I mean, you can see where the yield is going and where the probabilities are rising, right? How far? Maybe it was rising up, then it started coming down, right? So certainly these are all you can calculate, you know. Cheng, if you have something add on, okay, Cheng, you must be sleepy, right? It's
it's okay. Yeah, it's already morning. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah. Also, do you mean like the in the mid 1990s? Yeah, some people believe that's a small recession, something like that. Yeah, it's possible to check, but I believe many people, previous studies have already dig into that. Yeah, we can check if the literatures are.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I thought it would be interesting to see if even if your false rates are actually had some truth.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I understand. If you have many recessions, maybe it's much better to measure, right? Easy to, because you don't have that many observations, right? Right. That's one of the reasons we actually use the daily data, hoping that you'll have more leverage, you know, rather than quarterly data or monthly data. But it helps some ways, but doesn't help in other ways because your recession's not that many, right? You know, in this context, as I was telling you, Rudy Bush and Williams said that if you look at the SPF probability data, those guys with the professional forecasters never see a recession coming in 12 months, zero predictive power. But they said, look, this yield curve, everybody knows it has a huge predictive power at 12 months, 11 months. They say, how come they don't take that information? You know, and so we are saying, look, we are quantifying the associated hit rate and the false alarm rate, right? And then ask yourself, do you think that the person on the street would take that seriously, a professional forecaster, that indicator? Is it good enough for them? It may not be the answer. It may not solve the paradox, okay? But we are living as a possibility that don't look at those Harvard Square and all that, or the maximized value of the likelihood function to feel good about a particular predictor. You have to dig in.
I actually had a follow-up question a little bit.
Please, yeah.
So you use yield curve. So is it, and you get a fair amount of upward drift in the threshold. So do you, if you do it for something beyond yield curve, like corporate spread, do you still see that upward drift? Or more importantly, I think my actual question is, can you maximize it on the basis of two thresholds jointly?
Yeah, I think certainly can be done. Now, one thing we did, if you use, we use 10-year minus 3-month treasury bill rate here, but if you use forward rates, same, it doesn't change anything, it's more volatile. We have not looked at the other spreads like corporate minus government and that kind of thing, and so on. One can look if those spreads also have similar spread. But there have been a lot of paper on the instability in this relationship, right? That is the yield curve as a predictor of GDP growth and stuff like that, right? And people have found a lot of instability,
Right.
Right. And our thing is one way it is capturing the instability through the threshold, but it is not up and down. It is trending up. It is slightly going up very steadily. And now why you need a theorist to really explain why the threshold could be increased. Okay.
So the reason I kind of brought this up, so there was this interesting, I think QJE paper by Jeremy Stein et al. In I think 2-3 years back.
Okay.
It's actually in my paper in the citations. 2-3 years back, that they argue that BAA minus 10 years is one of the best predictors, and the key point was it's fairly long, available from 1919.
Right.
And
this is
so
what 10-year minus, 10-year minus
a lot. Well, I'm sorry.
Which spread this was 10-year and
BAA.
Okay, got it. Okay, yeah.
I think BAA, not BBB. BAA minus 10 years.
Okay, yeah. We can look into it and see. Yeah, that way the sample size would increase, right?
Yeah,
which is very important.
And if you get a spread, if you get a creeping up of spread, that
would be more convincing.
Right? In your results.
That would be more convincing.
Yes.
I agree. And yeah, no. You have your paper, right? Can you send me your paper?
Oh yeah, I would love
to. Your papers, yes. I really liked it. We have been working on machine learning quite a bit, including Cheng. We did a lot of work, but your work of these different layers and trying to connect with economic theory, right? This really appealing to me, because when people do this and they can't explain why so many hidden layers, I say why? Tell me a story. I need a story. I mean, I cannot believe. Oh, my forecasting work. Don't ask why. That's not good enough for an economist, right?
Exactly.
And so you just impose this very nice in terms of the horizons, right? Which makes so much sense, and they go through this thing. And Aravind, you're also that whole factor model and different factors and trying to extract so much is really pretty impressive work. It's a lot of work. And
thank you.
Yes.
Nice.
But if you have any more comment on our paper, let us know. We are revising the paper. In a paper like that, it's a simple paper, right? And so many people have written paper. People say, "What is new?" It's very hard unless you have a huge apparatus you are running through, right?
Mm-hmm.
These days, it is very difficult to publish. I mean, they need technology, right? And but if you say some simple things, people don't try to accept it immediately, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this importance of rare event, I have been believing for quite some time. I used to work in the Social Security as a consultant for many years, and I used to model disability application for disability insurance, which is hardly 5% of the population do, and we are trying to predict. And no matter what I do, which thousands of data, I can never identify those guys, but I identify the non-guys. Okay, no problem. But when I do 2x2 table, it's nothing. I just can't do no matter what I do. And then I convinced me, well, there's a problem here. Then I went through many published papers on logit probit, And you look, ask them to produce the confusion matrix, and you'll see the fun. You'll see that almost, it looks very good. All the coefficients are highly significant, right? Pseudo-R-bar square is very high, but ask how many times your model identified the thing that you wanted to identify, which is the rare thing, right? And you'll find hardly any. I'm serious, I checked a lot of it. And that is under the rug. See, people don't pull it out because there's no clear-cut solution to this, you know. And Pierce, I told you, Pierce, he wrote this paper in 1861 about the Kuiper score. Think about it. These people used to think about this thing, right? 150 years ago, when half of the human beings used to hang around naked, right? And these people are thinking of statistics. It's amazing. But yeah, I think that we had some good papers. If you have any more comments, Arvinda, looks like you think, of course, you think along those lines. You're working on a recession or something. Any ideas, send us.
Good question. Any of your papers are online? Can I get it online, or can you?
Yes. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
I have your email address, right? Yeah. I
Yeah.
can get your, yeah. Yeah. We have one or two papers on this. So we are revising this paper right now because this whole PRC stuff we added in last 1 month. Like Arvinda, if you saw his presentation in econometric study meeting, we didn't have this PRC stuff, right? So this is a very recent thing we discovered, and so we thought it would be interesting. And as we talk, even last night, Cheng found out that the equivalence of Kuiper score with this F2 score actually of PRC. And this kind of quite interesting. These two literally completely separated. And so, you know, you always learn, right? Anyway, so nice talking to both of you. Nice getting to know you, both of you. And we got a good job. And Kyo, I'll put a high recommendation for your paper. They will ask me how to you know, put a evaluation. You're a student, right? There's a student award there.
Okay,
Like
thank you.
$2,000.
Thank you so much. It was really nice meeting both of you. And again, if you can send me, or I will send an email for both of you. I would like to definitely read
or
both.
Email me, or just email me. Can you?
Yeah, I can email you. I can find both of your emails. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can find your on your website. I'm pretty sure.
I immediately send it to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Really
you.
nice.
So we are done for the day, right? Okay, good.
Okay. Thank you.
Arvinda, if you're coming New York, both of you visit us. We have seminars and so all the time.
Absolutely. That's great to hear.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.